Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the information noise and give you the essential knowledge that delivers maximum results.
Hey there.
So if you're listening to this, you're probably someone who values efficiency. And maybe, just maybe, you're feeling deeply frustrated with your current English learning progress.
And that frustration it's completely valid. We know you're busy.
Right.
Maybe you're one of the millions of dedicated learners who has worked, tirelessly on a skill like learning English for months or even years.
Putting in all those hours.
All the hours only to feel like you're just constantly running on a treadmill, you know? You're busy, you're disciplined, but you just don't see any proportional gain in fluency or confidence.
That feeling, that exact feeling of being busy but not actually productive, that's what we are going to dismantle today.
Yeah.
If you've been working hard but not seeing the genuine, spontaneous fluency gains you want, this deep dive is going to fundamentally change your entire framework for learning.
And we aren't here to tell you to work less. That's not the point. We're here to show you how to work smarter.
Exactly.
We're applying a framework that is a complete game changer for mastering English efficiency, the 80-20 rule.
Also known as the Pareto Principle.
That's the one.
So our mission today is pretty simple. We're going to define this rule, of course, but more importantly, we're going to use our source material to pinpoint the specific 20% of activities.
The vital few.
The vital few that yield a staggering 80% of your English fluency results. And then we'll show you precisely how to reallocate your precious time to achieve that real, applied knowledge quickly and thoroughly.
Okay, so to start, let's just lay the foundation. What exactly is this 80-20 rule?
Right.
It's formally known as the Pareto Principle, and it's this. Well, it started as a socioeconomic observation that has since proven to be a kind of universal law of, inefficiency and optimization.
Okay, let's unpack that a little, the history,
Yeah.
because it's named after an Italian economist, right? Vilfredo Pareto.
Yeah.
And he made this observation way back in the late 1800s, long before anyone was thinking about productivity hacks or language learning.
Absolutely. He was just looking at the economy. And what he discovered was that economic power was incredibly concentrated. He noticed that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by only 20% of the population.
And that wasn't like a government policy or anything?
No, not at all. It was just this recurring natural phenomenon of unequal distribution.
And that's what's so fascinating. He started with an observation about wealth, but this is where it gets really interesting, because that pattern, it just started popping up everywhere, didn't it? Across all kinds of different fields.
Absolutely everywhere. The principle basically states that for many outcomes, roughly 80% of the consequences come from just 20% of the causes.
From business.
In business, you see it all the time. 80% of your revenue probably comes from 20% of your customers.
Or 20% of your products.
Exactly. In software, 80% of the system crashes are caused by 20% of the bugs. It is just, it's pervasive.
So, okay, if we apply this to learning, to productivity, the core insight is, well, it's revolutionary, really.
It is.
Not all of your effort is equal.
Yeah.
You might spend 10 hours studying English this week, but our sources strongly suggest that only about 2 of those hours,
The high impact 20%.
that's the time that will actually contribute meaningfully to your functional conversational fluency.
Exactly. And realizing that it's freeing. It really is. Because it gives you permission to stop doing the things that look and feel like work, but are ultimately low impact. The goal isn't to work less, but to ruthlessly identify that crucial high leverage 20% and just spend the vast majority of your time there.
And then what? Deprioritize the rest.
Deprioritize the 80% of activities that are just eating up your hours without really delivering results.
Because if you're focusing on the wrong things, on those low-leverage activities, you can work hard all day, every day, and still feel completely stuck at that intermediate level.
For years sometimes.
For years. The 80-20 rule forces you to align your effort with what you actually want. And what you want is fluency. Okay, now that we have the framework, let's jump into section 1. Let's identify that essential 20% for English learning. This is the core strategy, right?
This is everything.
If a learner has, say, 10 hours a week to study, where should 8 of those hours go?
Well, the traditional approach often emphasizes these isolated components, like memorizing grammar rules or translating word lists.
Yeah, the stuff you do in school.
Exactly. But our analysis confirms that the real path to fluency is integrated. It's compound practice.
And I would argue, based on our source material, that the single highest impact activity, the true cornerstone of the 20%, is speaking.
Okay, that might sound a bit counterintuitive to someone who thinks, wait, I need perfect grammar before I can speak.
Right.
So why prioritize speaking, which is inherently risky and you're going to make mistakes, over something that feels more foundational, like reading or grammar drills?
Because of this principle of compound practice. Think of it like a linguistic triathlon.
Okay.
When you practice speaking, you aren't just making sounds with your mouth. You are simultaneously activating and integrating every other major skill.
So you're pulling vocabulary.
You're retrieving vocabulary, you're constructing sentences using grammar, you're working on your pronunciation, and you're actively listening to process the response.
I see the neurological demand there. It forces this instantaneous recall and production, all under pressure.
Yes.
And that's a crucial distinction. When you study an isolated grammar rule from a textbook, you're only practicing one thing, which is knowledge retrieval. But speaking forces performance, it forces synthesis, application.
Precisely. It gives you so much more bang for your buck. Every minute you spend speaking is a minute spent integrating 4 or 5 different processes at once.
So we can safely say that speaking, and then of course the intensive listening that fuels it, are the absolute top 2 skills.
They give you 80% of the results.
Okay. With that in mind, let's get even more granular. We've identified 4 pillars of these high-impact 20% activities that lead to rapid functional fluency.
Pillar number 1 is, I think, the most foundational: real conversations in English. And we have to emphasize that word real, because the definition here is everything.
It really is. High-impact conversation is not reading sentences out loud from a book.
No.
And it is definitely not repeating a scripted dialogue where you already know all the answers. That kind of mechanical repetition is just, it's low impact.
High-impact practice has to be active, it has to be spontaneous and unscripted. It forces you to think on your feet, to formulate an original response, to negotiate meaning.
To deal with unexpected vocabulary or interruptions.
All of it. It engages what linguists call output processing, which solidifies the information in your brain so much faster than passively taking it in ever could.
And that kind of spontaneous output forces you to confront your gaps immediately.
How so?
Well, if you can't remember the past perfect tense during a real conversation, that mistake becomes very salient. Your brain prioritizes fixing it.
Because it's embarrassing.
It is. In contrast, if you get a grammar exercise wrong on a piece of paper, you erase it and move on. There's no real consequence.
So a real conversation embeds the correction because it affects actual communication.
Exactly.
Okay, so the second pillar, which is the necessary input, is listening to natural native speed English.
And so many learners get stuck in this comfort zone. They only listen to slowed down, simplified, or, artificial textbook English that's designed for a classroom.
And that comfort zone is a productivity killer.
It really is. When you only listen to that artificial, super clear, standardized speech, you're not training your ear for the real world at all.
You're not ready for a fast-talking podcast.
Or background noise, or different regional accents, or the way native speakers just reduce sounds when they're speaking quickly.
So to train your ear for how people actually talk, you need authentic content.
Regular speed podcasts, streaming TV shows, YouTube channels about your other interests, movies. You need language that was made for native speakers, not for learners.
The science backs this up, right?
It does. Your brain needs massive exposure to the acoustic reality of the language. If you're consistently listening to native speed content, you're simultaneously improving your comprehension, your rhythm, your intonation, and you're building this implicit understanding of grammar.
All high impact results from just one single activity.
That's it.
Okay, moving to pillar 3. This one fundamentally changes how we absorb the building blocks of the language. Learning English in phrases and chunks, not isolated words.
This is such a radical shift away from the traditional flashcard method.
It really is.
When you learn an isolated word like depend, you might know the translation, but you don't know its behavior. You might not know it needs the preposition on.
So you have to stop and think and mentally construct the whole phrase every single time.
And it slows you down.
If we connect this back to real-time conversation, learning in chunks solves that application problem immediately. Instead of just learning the oscillated verb mind, which then requires you to give it the whole structure.
You learn a functional chunk.
Like, do you mind if I are? Or, never mind.
By learning phrases or collocations, you're basically downloading these pre-built communication units. It's the difference between building a house brick by brick in the middle of a conversation
Which is impossible.
versus using prefabricated walls.
Yeah.
When you use chunks, you bypass the need to analyze every little grammar rule, and that frees up your mental energy for the high-impact job of actually generating meaning.
And finally, Pillar 4 is all about creating an environment of massive constant input, immersion activities.
Right. This is where you leverage the time you would normally classify as not studying.
I see. So this is outside of your dedicated study block.
Exactly. Immersion is surrounding yourself with English so that your brain is just always absorbing it on some level.
So we're talking about specific actions here.
Very specific. Change your phone's language to English. Switch your GPS directions to English. Read English news headlines.
Watch YouTube videos about your other hobbies, like cooking or gaming or history, but do it all in English.
The reasoning here is quantitative. Your brain needs thousands of repetitions and constant interaction for information to really stick. Immersion activities provide that massive, low-stress quantity of input.
It's the constant background noise that allows the high-impact activities, like speaking, to suddenly feel much, much smoother.
So, to recap the 20% focus, real spontaneous conversation.
Native speed, authentic listening.
Phrases and chunks and constant immersion.
This is where you should strategically spend 80% of your total study time. That right there is the strategic shift.
Okay, now we have to flip the coin. We need to move into section 2, which is spotting the low-impact 80%. And this is, I would argue, the most crucial section because these activities, they often feel the most productive.
That is the trap. These are the activities that require hard work and discipline and real effort, but they give you very little measurable return on fluency.
Right.
They let you feel busy, but they rarely move the needle on your actual ability to communicate.
Okay, so let's start with the first and maybe the most common time waster, which often forms the entire foundation of traditional language education.
Oh, I know this one.
Memorizing isolated grammar rules.
Okay, but wait, hold on a second. Grammar is necessary, right? For structure, for clarity. We aren't suggesting people just skip grammar altogether, are we? That sounds like chaos.
Not at all. No, no.
Yeah.
Grammar is essential, but the method of learning it is the low-impact trap.
I see.
Sitting down and memorizing the abstract rules for the past perfect continuous tense from a dense textbook that is highly low impact, you gain what we call explicit knowledge. You know the rules, but you gain zero implicit knowledge.
Which is the ability to use it without thinking.
To use it spontaneously, yes.
Okay, I see the crucial distinction now.
Yeah.
The effort it takes to gain that abstract knowledge is just disproportionately high compared to the practical benefit if you don't use it immediately.
It's the difference between knowing the driving manual inside and out.
And actually driving a car.
Exactly. You can spend an hour drilling the difference between since and for on a worksheet. That's abstract, isolated, 80% time. Or you can spend that hour telling a friend about your life using those time markers, making mistakes, maybe getting corrected, and trying again. That forced application is 20% time because it builds the neural pathways for spontaneous usage.
So the grammar rules you internalize during a conversation, they become implicit knowledge, where the correct structure just feels right, rather than you having to consciously stop and apply some formula you memorized.
And that isolated memorization almost guarantees the knowledge stays stuck in your conscious memory. It's just not accessible during fast speech.
Okay. Next up, the classic time waster for vocabulary.
Translating isolated word lists. This is the world of the traditional flashcard where you have an English word on one side.
And a direct translation into your native language on the other.
Yep.
And while flashcards feel incredibly productive, right?
Oh.
Because you can churn through this huge volume, hundreds of words in an hour, what's the actual practical output?
The outcome is that you suffer from what we call the recognition without production problem.
Okay, explain that.
You can see the word, you instantly know the translation, and you feel smart. But that connection is so shallow, the word has no contextual depth.
Right. You don't know if it's formal or casual or if it's a noun or a verb.
Or does it take the preposition to or at? You don't know any of that.
So you end up investing hours building this huge passive vocabulary. You can recognize thousands of words when you're reading, but your active vocabulary, the words you can actually use when you speak, remains tiny.
It's a massive return on effort for minimal functional output. The cognitive effort is just misplaced. You should be learning utility, not just definitions.
Okay. The third low-impact activity often comes from a very old-school disciplinary mindset.
Mechanical repetition without understanding. This might be, copying a sentence 10 times from a textbook, or just repeating a phrase without cognitively engaging with what it means or how it's built.
I've seen this in so many students who equate effort with learning. They really believe if they just write something or repeat it enough times, it'll magically stick.
Right. But if you're copying a complex sentence structure and you aren't analyzing why the structure is built that way,
Or you're not internalizing the meaning?
it's just rote muscle memory. Your brain isn't forming the deep connections it needs for you to recall it spontaneously. You're training your hand to write or your mouth to repeat, but not your mind to produce original language.
And that's rote memory, which
Yeah.
fades so quickly. It's an extremely poor investment of your study time.
Okay, and finally, a more nuanced one that traps a lot of intermediate learners. Focusing too much on perfect pronunciation of individual sounds.
Okay, this is a tricky one because pronunciation is important.
It is vital for intelligibility, but the key word here is perfection and isolation.
So spending hours trying to nail the perfect subtle difference between the short I sound in ship and the long E in sheep.
In a vacuum, yes, that is low impact.
Because what's the actual real-world goal here?
Communication.
Communication. We want people to understand us. As long as your speech crosses the intelligibility threshold, meaning people get your meaning without excessive effort, those tiny individual phonetic distinctions are 80% activities.
And the time you spend drilling a single sound is time you are not spending having a real conversation.
And it's in actual speaking practice, where you get immediate feedback and you self-correct, that your pronunciation improves naturally and as a whole system.
Trying to sound perfectly native before you can even hold a spontaneous 5-minute conversation is just, it's prioritizing the wrong thing.
So if we step back and look at this whole 80% bucket, all of these activities share a common theme, don't they?
They do.
They're solitary, they're abstract, they're focused on isolated little pieces, and they lack any real-world application.
They make you a very good student of the language.
But they severely delay your progress toward becoming a confident user of the language.
Okay, so now we get to section 3, where we provide the personal proof. It's one thing to talk about abstract principles, but these shifts, they're often driven by painful, necessary personal mistakes.
And I'm happy to go first because my experience learning French is a textbook example of this 80% trap. I was a student of French for years, studying in high school, continuing into university.
And what did those years of study actually look like, practically speaking?
They were just dominated by grammar. My main focus was sitting for hours doing mechanical, fill-in-the-blank exercises. I was a master of transforming active voice to passive voice, conjugating complicated verbs. I chased perfection in these abstract paper exercises.
So you mastered the 80% activity. You got really good at the test, but not the skill.
Precisely. I could get an A+ on every single grammar test, but the result was crippling. The moment I had to speak French spontaneously, my mind would just seize up.
All that knowledge was explicit.
It was stuck in the rule book part of my brain. I knew about the language, but I couldn't use it. The knowledge was totally inert.
So what was the turning point? What forced you to abandon that safe, traditional 80% work?
It was forced immersion. I went to live in France for 2 months. And initially, it was terrifying. I couldn't rely on English. No more grammar books, no more quiet time to fill in worksheets.
You were forced into it.
I was forced to use French to buy bread, to talk to my neighbors, to deal with the bank, just to survive every single day.
So you transitioned entirely from the low-impact 80% activities to the high-impact 20% activities. Real conversation, listening, full immersion.
And the difference was, it was genuinely staggering. In those 2 months of forced real-world application, my fluency and my conversational confidence improved more than it had in 2 years of textbook grammar study.
Wow.
I'd been wasting so much effort on exercises that never required me to synthesize a thought or even think in French. I stopped worrying about the perfect tense and just started prioritizing getting my message across.
2 months versus 2 years. I mean, that comparison alone should shock any learner into reevaluating their study habits. The mental shift is profound.
It is.
From getting a perfect grade to achieving functional communication.
Absolutely. The anxiety around making a mistake just vanished because the need to communicate became so much greater than the need to be perfect.
My story is very similar, actually, but it's centered on vocabulary, the vocabulary obsession. When I started learning Spanish, I was utterly obsessed with volume. I thought the direct path to fluency was just knowing the most words.
So you became a human dictionary.
I tried. I became the flashcard tyrant, just relentlessly drilling isolated words.
I can picture it.
A total tyrant. I had hundreds of these cards, translating Spanish to English and back again. I'd spend 90 minutes every single day just translating and reviewing these isolated lists. It was hard work, definitely an 80% activity in terms of time and diligence.
And what was the painful, practical outcome of all that dedication?
I suffered from exactly that recognition without application problem we talked about. I could see the Spanish word on the card and know the translation instantly, but the moment I tried to deploy that word spontaneously in a sentence, I couldn't.
It wouldn't connect.
It wouldn't connect. I didn't know the proper conjugation or the necessary prepositions or the natural context. Had a lot of data, but zero functional ability.
So how did you make the switch?
I switched completely to watching Spanish TV shows, a 20% immersion activity.
Okay.
And suddenly I wasn't just memorizing el perro, the dog. I was seeing and internalizing the full contextual phrase, el perro se ha comido mis zapatos.
The dog has eaten my shoes.
The dog has eaten my shoes. I learned vocabulary so much more effectively, embedded immediately in context, and honestly, the process was just immensely more enjoyable.
And that brings us to a really crucial nuance of the 80-20 rule. Because some people might hear us and think, okay, great, I'm throwing away my grammar book forever, and I'm just going to watch Netflix.
Right. And we have to clarify that the 80% activities like grammar exercises or flashcards, they are not completely useless.
They're not.
They have value for supplementing your learning, for checking your basic understanding, or for a structured review. They're tools in your toolbox.
It's purely a matter of proportion, of strategic deployment. We suggest an ideal split. 80% of your total study time should be focused on those high-impact 20% activities.
Speaking, listening, immersion.
Right. And the remaining 20% of your time can be used to supplement with those lower-impact activities, like a quick check of a grammar rule you just messed up in a conversation.
The core insight is that the best, most effective way to truly learn grammar and vocabulary is through the 20% activities. You learn context-appropriate vocabulary by listening to authentic content, and you solidify grammar patterns by being forced to use them in spontaneous conversation.
So the high-impact activities are the engine.
And the low-impact activities are maybe the fuel gauge. You check it occasionally.
I like that. And that strategic shift often triggers a really common psychological hurdle, which is the guilt factor.
Yes. Many learners have been conditioned since childhood that real studying has to involve grueling, painstaking, low-impact work, the copying, the drilling, the memorizing.
So when they switch to spending an hour having a lively, interesting conversation with a language partner, or watching an engaging documentary in English.
It feels like they're being lazy.
Yes, because the activity is enjoyable. They feel like they should be suffering more.
They need to overcome that crippling feeling of laziness that comes from abandoning those traditional methods. You have to trust the results. If having real conversations makes you more fluent and confident than filling out verb tables,
then the conversation is the efficient, necessary work. It doesn't matter how easy or enjoyable it feels.
efficiency often looks very different from effort. Focusing on the 20% is working smart, which might feel unconventional at first, but it delivers the measurable results you're looking for. Okay, moving into section 4. We need to personalize this framework. The 20% activities we've defined are universally high impact, but the content and the focus of that 20%, it really must be customized based on your individual goals.
This is where we stop chasing this like generalized academic fluency and we start chasing necessary practical fluency. You have to define what English means to you and what tasks you need to perform every day.
Okay, let's take example 1, the software engineer. This person needs English for reading highly technical documentation,
Collaborating with international teams.
writing clear user stories, participating in complex, specific technical meetings.
So their 20% high-impact activities shift immediately toward their professional needs. They should be focusing on reading advanced technical articles, listening to real-world tech talks.
And practicing professional conversation scenarios like how to summarize a project status, or how to deliver critical feedback using the right kind of language, or just running a meeting.
For this engineer, spending time memorizing obscure idioms from old Hollywood movies or drilling slang related to sports they don't follow.
That becomes a low-impact 80% time waster. It's fun, sure, but it doesn't move them toward their goal of communicating technical detail clearly.
The customization here is so crucial. The engineer's speaking practice might focus heavily on modal verbs, must, should, could, because that's the language of making recommendations and giving feedback. That specific focus, learned through practice, is 20%.
Now let's consider example 2. The traveler or gap year student. This person needs English primarily for social interaction, navigation, asking for help, casual conversation.
Survival and connection.
Exactly. Their 20% is going to focus heavily on mastering high-frequency travel-related phrases, mastering minimal responses like, got it, excuse me, and could you repeat that, and just achieving a strong conversational flow in small talk.
For the traveler, spending hours learning specialized business vocabulary or writing formal academic essays or obsessing over complex grammar like the third conditional.
That's an 80% waste of time. They need immediate functional communication.
So the first step in personalization is to do a reality check. What specific functional tasks do I need to do in English on a regular basis? And then use that answer to guide your high-impact content selection.
And the second way to identify your personalized 20% is through tracking and intuition. You have to listen to your own experience. Notice which activities genuinely make you feel more confident and more fluent.
So if you spent, say, 3 hours this week doing a certain activity like filling out a grammar workbook, and you feel no more capable of spontaneously making a simple sentence than you did last week.
That's your internal signal. That is your brain telling you that's an 80% low-impact activity. Reduce its investment immediately.
Conversely, if you spend 30 minutes in a spontaneous conversation and you successfully navigated a trippy topic, you'll feel that confidence spike, that sudden ease of retrieval.
That's your brain telling you, do more of this. Trust the activities that make you feel like a user, not just a student.
Okay, so let's apply this 80-20 principle to the 4 core skills just to give our listeners some really actionable categories for their practice time.
Let's do it, starting with listening. The 20% high-impact listening activity is active listening with focus to authentic content.
Meaning you're sitting down, you're paying attention, maybe taking notes, using the transcript, and you're processing the information for meaning and structure.
It's focused cognitive engagement. The 80% low-impact activity is passive background listening. Having a podcast playing while you drive or clean or work on something else.
It provides some exposure, which is better than nothing.
It is, but it's low impact compared to dedicated, focused effort because your attention just isn't engaged in processing the nuances of the language.
Okay, for speaking.
The 20% is spontaneous, unscripted speaking, talking to a language partner, recording your answers to hypothetical questions, or even shadowing native speech patterns immediately after you hear them.
It requires immediate, active thought formation.
And language retrieval. The 80% low-impact activity for speaking is mechanical repetition of scripted dialogues or reading aloud without actively processing the meaning. Feels like speaking, but you're just reading and reciting pre-made text. You're not generating original thought.
Okay, now for vocabulary.
The 20% is learning the most common high-frequency words, so the top 1 to 2,000 words, but learning them in context and in phrases.
So you're focusing on utility and immediate application.
Exactly. And the 80% is memorizing rare, advanced, or unnecessary words, anything outside that high-frequency bracket that native speakers barely use. Or, again, learning words in isolation from translation lists. Stop chasing word count. Chase utility.
And finally, grammar.
The 20% for grammar is learning through exposure and use. This means noticing patterns naturally in conversations and reading and correcting mistakes during your communication practice. You're treating grammar as a tool for communication, not as a separate academic subject.
And the 80% for grammar remains isolated grammar exercises and abstract rule memorization. These activities are just disconnected from the application environment, which severely reduces their impact on your fluency.
It's studying about communication, not practicing communication itself.
This deep dive wouldn't be complete without giving you some practical, implementable templates. So Section 5 is all about smart study schedules built rigorously on this 80-20 principle.
Yeah, we need to show people that shifting their focus doesn't mean finding extra time. It just means reallocating the time they already have, but efficiently.
Okay, let's start with the most limited schedule, 30 minutes daily. This is tight, so we have to be absolutely ruthless in our focus on compound practice.
When time is that severely limited, you must only focus on the top 2 most essential integrated skills.
So the breakdown would be
15 minutes of dedicated spontaneous speaking practice and 15 minutes of active, focused listening practice.
That's it. In this schedule, there is simply no time for low-impact activities like isolated grammar review or flashcards.
None. The grammar and the vocabulary you acquire come directly and efficiently through those 30 minutes of integrated practice. You're prioritizing the high-impact production and intake cycle.
Okay, now for a more typical schedule. 1 hour daily, 60 minutes. This allows us to apply the 80-20 split directly. So about 48 minutes high impact, 12 minutes low impact.
Okay, so here's the breakdown. We dedicate 20 minutes to speaking, practice a conversation, or maybe focus shadowing. Then 20 minutes for active listening to authentic podcasts or TV, where you're really processing the meaning.
Okay, so that's 40 minutes on the top two. What about the remaining high impact time?
The remaining high-impact time, about 10 minutes, should be spent learning phrases in context. Maybe reviewing high-frequency phrases you found in an article or a dialogue, or specifically studying collocations.
And the final 10 minutes.
That's your low-impact allowance. That's the 20% of your time you can spend on the 80% activities. This could be a quick grammar rule check, some structured writing practice, or reviewing mistakes you made during your speaking session.
But that 10 minutes is just there for supplemental structure. I can never dominate the schedule.
And this model contrasts so sharply with the traditional approach, which might be 30 minutes on grammar exercises, 20 minutes on flashcards, and maybe 10 minutes of speaking if you're lucky. We've flipped that ratio entirely to prioritize real-world application.
Okay, finally, the ambitious schedule. 2 hours daily, 120 minutes.
The 80-20 proportion stays the same, but the sheer volume of high-impact practice just skyrockets.
So we expand the blocks.
Significantly. 40 minutes for dedicated spontaneous speaking and 40 minutes for active listening. That's already 80 minutes of compound practice, which will dramatically accelerate your fluency.
Then maybe 20 minutes for learning phrases in context and active reading.
And the final 20 minutes can be the anything else bucket dedicated, focused writing, a deeper grammar review based on mistakes, or studying a specific skill like presentation English. The key is that the high-impact activities must always, without fail, dominate the schedule.
Now, efficiency isn't just about scheduling the right things. It's also about aggressively eliminating major time wasters that drain your energy and your confidence.
And the number one killer of spontaneous practice is perfectionism. This is spending excessive time crafting one perfect sentence in your head instead of just communicating imperfectly and moving on.
Perfectionism is so counterproductive.
It is because it stems from a fear of making mistakes. And that fear just stops spontaneous practice dead in its tracks. If you spend 5 minutes formulating a flawless response, you've stalled the entire conversation, you've disrupted the flow.
And wasted valuable practice time.
Focus on flow and clear communication, not perfect grammar. The correction will come later. The flow is what builds fluency.
Time waster number 2, passive studying without application. This is that intellectual trap of constantly learning about English instead of actively using English.
Oh, this is a huge dopamine trap. People watch endless grammar videos on YouTube, or they read books about how to learn a language, and they feel productive because they're consuming information.
But if they aren't converting that knowledge into spoken or written output into application, it's mostly inert knowledge. You have to limit your learning about learning time drastically.
And the third major time waster is learning things you don't need. Don't waste your mental energy on obscure grammar rules or advanced rare vocabulary that even native speakers barely use.
Focus on the utility curve. The first 1,000 high-frequency words cover about 80% of native speech. The effort to learn the next 1,000 words yields a massive return.
But the effort to learn the 10,000th word, like sesquipedalian, is a colossal waste of effort unless you have an extremely specific, high-level academic need.
Focus on flawlessly executing the common basics first.
Ultimately, the 80-20 rule is not a magic shortcut to learning English effortlessly. It's a strategic tool that ensures every ounce of your dedication and consistency is pointed toward the activities that deliver the maximum possible measurable results.
You still have to put in the hours, but now you can feel confident that you're working on the right things, the things that guarantee fluency, not just test scores. So, to wrap up our deep dive, let's just summarize the key takeaways that we want you to carry forward, ready to implement this efficiency framework immediately.
We established the 80-20 rule. 80% of your progress comes from just 20% of your effort. Your new mission is to identify and maximize that 20% and deprioritize the rest.
And that high-impact 20% includes real, spontaneous speaking, active listening to native-speed authentic content, learning language and usable phrases and functional chunks, and continuous immersion in your daily life.
We identified the low-impact 80% time sinks: isolated grammar memorization, translating isolated word lists, mechanical repetition without cognitive engagement, and the obsessive pursuit of perfect, isolated pronunciation.
These should only be supplementary, never central to your plan.
And remember the personalization factor. Your 20% has to align precisely with your goals, whether you're a software engineer who needs technical language or a world traveler who needs small talk survival skills.
Focus relentlessly on utility and communication over abstract memorization.
And now for the practical challenge, the action step we want you to execute this week. We want you to perform a time audit, a cold, hard look at where your time is actually going.
For the next 7 days, track all of your English study time. Write down every single activity and how long you spent on it. Be specific. Drilling verb tables, 40 minutes. Talking to language partner about my day, 40 minutes.
At the end of the week, analyze your log, categorize each activity. Was it 20% high impact, focused on spontaneous application and native intake, or was it 80% low impact, isolated study? Then sum up the totals.
You will probably be shocked to find how much time you are still dedicating to the low-impact 80% activities just out of habit.
It's very common.
And your goal for the following week is simple. Adjust your schedule to shift the time you identified in that 80% bucket over to the high-impact 20% activities.
See if you can achieve a steady week where at least 80% of your time is spent in real-world application and spontaneous production.
And here is the final provocative thought to consider as you make this transition. The goal is not to work less, but to get faster, measurable results.
You have to trust the process, even if spending an hour having a flowing conversation or watching a compelling TV show feels less like traditional work than struggling through a complex grammar textbook.
Trust that communication-focused practice is the most direct and efficient route to fluency.
Work smarter, focus on the 20%, and watch your English fluency accelerate beyond what you thought was possible.
We believe in the power of efficient, enjoyable learning. Thanks for diving deep with us.
We'll see you next time.